Welcome back to another Technique Tuesday video. My name is Kyle Pitcher and I'm here to teach you today about chords and triads. So you might be thinking, I've heard of chords, but I don't really know what they are. Well, today I'm going to give you that explanation. When I define a chord as any grouping of two or more notes. Now, two or more notes, that leaves a lot of options. And we'll get into kind of like what you can do with some basic chords later, how they're supposed to function. But yeah, any two or more notes can make a chord. Any two or more. A single note, a chord. Together, aha, we've got our chord. So what are chords used for? You've heard the name, but you might not know exactly what they are. Chords are usually used to create harmony for something. So anytime I hear the word chords, I usually associate it with harmony lines, something in the background to make a melody sound good. So for instance, if I have my melody, my chords would make it sound good. So I can use those chords to kind of back up my melody and make it more interesting, really. Harmony and chords generally make music more interesting. Now, the chords I just played, they were pretty chords. Sometimes you can have chords that are not as pretty, but they are still chords because they're combinations of notes. So we have different kinds of chords we can use. Yes, you might have heard major and minor, and we'll get into those terms in a second. But how do I as a musician really use chords? Well, you can use them in a couple different ways. When you pick a group of notes, say we'll take, I'll just explain to you that a D major chord is D, F sharp, A. And I've got it right here. D, F sharp, A. I can play the notes all at once, or I can play them one at a time. Playing them all at once, you should generally call that a chord voicing. And you can play them in different inversions. Still the same notes, but it's F sharp, A, D is high now. D, A, F sharp. Or excuse me, A, D, F sharp. So you've got different ways to play your voicings, and then you can play them one at a time. You can play them as an arpeggio. So the arpeggios are one at a time. The voicings are chords all together, all the notes together. So what might make a good chord? Well, I think the term good is subjective. You might be thinking, okay, like what kind of chords can I use? It depends on what you're trying to do. Depends on really the mood your music's trying to make. Different chords have different sound qualities to them. So the major chord, like I just played there, generally known as like a happier chord. Minor chords, a little bit sadder. There are other kinds of chords aside from major and minor too. If you didn't know, there's one called a diminished chord. And we're specifically talking triads here, groups of three notes. But there's a diminished triad, which might sound anxious or mysterious. Soup, wrong chord there. Is it soup? Aha, there we go. We've got our diminished triad. We have, you can call it an augmented triad, which might be surprise sounding. So, I mean, you can find different kinds of chords and different kinds of things. What we're going to focus on here is the major scale and the chords that come from those. So, something that you might find, say, in your 6th grade orchestra class. The major scale, something we commonly have a lot. And we're going to take, for example, the major scale, C major right now. No sharps, no flats. So, the notes in that scale are C, D, E, F, G, B. One more time. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. We've got all those together, all natural notes. So chords can be picked out from different notes within that scale. And generally, if you're trying to turn your math hat on here, you can find a different chord built around every scale note that you have. Some might call them a scale degree. So if I start with the first note in the scale, C, I want to build an arpeggio off of that to create my C chord. And so what I have to do is I have to skip a note, play the third note after C, skip a note, play the 5th note. And then I have my C chord. This one just happens to be a major chord because it's got that happier sound to it. I can do the same thing from D. I can go D, skip 1, go to F, skip 1, go to A. I've got my D minor chord there. That happens to be naturally occurring during the C major scale. If I go to E, same idea. Skip 1 to G, skip 1 to B. E minor. Then we go to F. Skip 1, G, A. Skip 1 to C. There we go. G. And I keep doing this all the way through. B is a little bit different. We have B, D, F, which creates that maybe mysterious diminished chord that you heard. And then finally we come back to C. And so you can play all of those chords just built on the arpeggios built on every single note. So if I'm putting it in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I've got my major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And then what I can do from there is, from each of those notes, I can skip one and build a chord off of that. So like I was saying, you got C, skip 1 E, skip 1 G. You create your arpeggio, C chord. The second note of the C major scale, D, skip 1, skip 1. And you can play around with those. You'll hear lots of different combinations of happy, sad, mysterious, all those sorts of things if you play around with those chords in the major scale. So this major versus minor thing, those are the two we hear most often. The thing that makes something major or minor is the third note in the chord. The third of the chord, which is not actually the third note if you play the chord. The third of the chord is actually the second note in the chord, which is a little bit confusing to think about. But so if I start on C, the third note in the scale would be E, which is the second note in my chord. That's the one that makes it major or minor. If I wanted to change it to a minor chord, I would have to go low with my third. We call it a flat third. And I'd change it to a minor chord, so instead of E, it'd be E flat. And then the G would stay the same. Minor, major, minor, major. And so I can go back and forth between any of those chords. D. If you start on a minor chord, you'd have to raise your third to make it major. So from F natural, I'd go to F sharp. Major chord. And so on and so forth. So you can figure out any different notes and chords that you want from there. Hopefully this gave you some good ideas for just music techniques and tips to play around with. I think that's all I've got for you today. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I'm happy to help you out with that. Thanks so much. You have a good day.